Hi Jason, what was the last music you listened to?
The last music I listened to was last night actually, a young unreleased vocalist from London. It's called Joss. Pianist and singer-songwriter who I'm interested in possibly working with. That's the very last thing I listened to.
Is he a friend of yours, or how you found his music when he's unreleased?
He got in touch with me through social media, through Instagram.
And generally, what kind of music do you listen to these days?
I listen to everything. Still digging the crates, looking backwards as well as present, and everything from pop to left field to dance music to hip hop. Everything really. It's not really changed. There's a lot of music being released, a lot of it which is quite transient in my opinion, and it's creating a lot of noise but will disappear very quickly. So I'm more about kind of longevity in music.
What was your earliest music experience or memory that motivated you to create music? Do you remember?
I guess one of a long-standing memory in music was a Queen concert.
Really?
I was 14, or maybe even a little bit younger. I went with my next-door neighbour who was 18, so I was a minor. It was somewhere in the north of England, and in a big stadium, supported by Status Quo.
Oh, really?
And so
Great combo.
I was tiny, and it was a huge arena show. I was kind of like at the back, couldn't see anything, and I found my way. I was kind of gravitated to kind of get closer and closer to the stage. But obviously everybody was huge, 6 foot plus tall. Status Quo crowd were bikers, leather, kind of cut off denim jackets, and quite impressive. But I ended up on the shoulders of the fans, had best view in the house, and Queen came on stage, and it was probably one of Queen and The Cure live when I was very young were very defining moments. Obviously very much into kind of studio-based music, but seeing some of my kind of favourites live was kind of like a turning point.
Have you dreamed that you will be also a rock star like Queen or The Cure?
Not really, obviously it's... My background is very... I went to art school, so it's very creative, so painting, photography, sculpture, installation, time-based like filmmaking and music, but I kept the music very separate at art college. Even though it was a very open fine art degree, there was early computing in the course that a few students were kind of pursuing, but it was more about, not necessarily about the kind of glamorous kind of being a rock star. It was more about just the intrigue in the creative world and the exploration and the critique. I was taught to critique oneself and the work that you made through my 3-year fine art degree, which is a really important kind of like development for like just critical analysis. And maybe once a month, you'd have to stand up in front of your whole year group and present some work and explain it. And it was good. It's good kind of. It was good practice for actually questioning the world around us and what influences us and how we put abstraction together to kind of create a narrative.
You mentioned early computing. Do you remember the first computer you made music on?
I remember the first computer I played games on,
Yeah.
which was a ZX Spectrum.
Yeah, I also had it.
And it was banned by my parents because I was doing too much gaming and not studying. Which, respectfully, they did the right thing. My first computer for sequencing, because obviously Sound Designer was the earliest version of Pro Tools.
Yeah.
And that was just and there was I can't remember, sound edit was the other kind of just 2-track stereo or 2 mono tracks as audio. But sequencing, I was working with early version of Cubase on a Apple Performer 630. But it was all, for me, it was all about the sampler.
Yeah.
You know, I used to intern at Ninja Tune, who was the founders of Cold Cut. And
Sure.
it was all about, you know, breaks and beats and sampling kind of like old funk and like the Shadows, which were kind of influenced drum and bass and jungle. And so it was crate digging. And my S3000 was my kind of like workhorse, and the computer was a great kind of like conduit for kind of like just sequencing the ideas. So it's that was my early setup. So just a sampler and a sequencer, and obviously a huge collection of film music, esoteric kind of like musique concrète, world music, just everything, you know, classical music. It's just trying to find, and in one aspect, I was very much interested in film, but then film music became a very key kind of like component of my kind of like palette and repertoire. Whereas I would find some amazing little kind of motifs. And you know, in film music, there is a theme, there's motifs, there's repetition of these motifs and reworkings of these motifs. And I would find lots of kind of like wonderful samples, and which were fed into this 3000 and regurgitated. But I forgot what your question was.
First computer, in fact.
Yeah.
But your music often combines various genres such as jazz, electronic music, classical music. How do you go about blending these different styles together and create your signature sound?
It was more, all was exploration in the beginning. Obviously, the fine art degree that I chose was not about specializing. And the fear to specialize for me was to make decisions too early in my life and in my creative kind of journey. And so the degree that I chose was, you don't have to specialize, you can actually jump from any department at any time, or you can cross-pollinate. And that, in a sense, was how I approached music too. It's like, why, you know, you go into a record shop, everything is defined and categorized, which kind of makes sense as just to navigate your way around, you know, a huge selection of records. You know, when I was crate digging in the States while touring, and you'd go into warehouses full of records, uncategorized, it's a nightmare. If you've got, you know, a little Vestax turntable, like portable, and you've got a couple of days, and if you've got the patience, you'll find some good things to either to DJ or to sample. But the categorization is simply good for navigating, but in terms of the creative endeavor, I found it too limiting. You know, rock, classical music, they were not crossing academically. They're not allowed. There's very distinctive separations, which I didn't really find very compelling. Whereas under the umbrella of creativity, everything can be brought in, whether it's kind of theatre, poetry, whether it's filmmaking, kind of performance art, music, printmaking and photography, so on. I in art college, I touched on all of it, but I found that music as a language was the most profound for me. It encompassed all of it. Therefore, going into music, it was not about kind of closure on, it has to be, I have to work in this kind of genre in a broad sense. It's like, music is music, it's all, I don't see the definitions. I don't want to see the defining lines. The more you look into it, the lines get blurred. Yeah. And there's more connection, the digger you deep. It's more about the kind of the knowledge. I think the way music is shared to the general public is a little bit too basic.
Younger generation maybe these days don't care too much about genres, styles, borders, and so on. Do you like it?
I like that the fact that there is more blurred lines in the genres and the definition. I don't think there's a lot of on digital streaming platforms. There's not a lot of good curation.
Yeah.
I find TikTok actually a really fun and inspiring kind of curator of music.
Yeah.
More so than Spotify. No disrespect, it seems to be more of a library than a kind of curator, because the algorithms I find are not very progressive. So, for example, the Cinematic Orchestra, if you look for you may also like, who is making those choices is their kind of music editors or directors, and I find it disgusting.
Right.
It's like, why don't you ask the artist who you should maybe listen to related to my sound? And they have decided on my behalf, which I find absolutely appalling. And the 5 possible choices that they have are maybe from 20 years ago. It's very not current. And I find it quite sad, to be honest.
You have been releasing on respected Ninja Tunes label since beginning. What does it mean to you?
It means freedom. Mm-hmm. It's always been independent. I was drawn to Ninja Tune through a DJ friend who was I think he was a joiner by trade, but a DJ, and he's now got a small record label called Fluid Downs, either in London or Barcelona. Mm-hmm. And I started Ninja Tune interning. I finished my degree, moved up to Scotland to pay off college debts, and then moved down to London, was DJing on pirate radio stations, underground parties in Brixton. It was amazing. It was a great time. London was kind of full of pirate radio shows, stations. There was squat parties, underground parties, kind of dance music was really popping. The Blue Note Club in London had like Metalheads, had Ninja, had Mo Wax, had all of the indies, like every night of the week on repeat, and it was one amazing time. And I was just wanting to get into a label to kind of understand the mechanism of a record label. Because as a child, you see your favorite bands, and the separation, the distance is incredible. You can't get anywhere near it. It's mystical. You don't know how to get to possibly where they are standing on a stage. Not necessarily to the same scale, but there's no advice in how to do it. Only from the inside will you get some good advice. So I went to the label. Became an intern, and then started kind of presenting music to Ninja. And they were very, very open-minded, and it was actually Ninja Tune, Mo Wax, and Warp Records. Yeah. And Domino, but as a little bit more on the rock, indie rock kind of tip. And Ninja Tune have just always supported me. It's a very transparent, very honest label, and they've never tried to direct me. It's always support. When I did deliver To Build a Home after Motion Then Every Day, they were like, this is a little bit of a left turn. And I'm like, it's a bit of a political kind of like point that I'm trying to make. Mm-hmm. I felt like dance music in club culture was just about the beat. Like, where's the song gone? Where's the music? Where's the melody? Where are the chord progressions? And it was all it was all about the beat. And rightly so, coming through break beats and jungle drum and bass, and then dubstep and so on. It's like, where's the song gone? So I tried to kind of make a statement by bringing that back to the table. It's like, this is as important. Let's not lose ourselves in just the detail within the pulse and the pocket of rhythms, which is very important. But yeah, they've just been very supportive. throughout. And at times I was offered publishing deals with majors, and I always just backed off, because just lose control. And then you might just become, they try to wrap up as many potential money-making kind of artists, and then you just become part of a catalogue. Ninja are very proactive. It's like a smaller scale, but they act proactive with their artists and their catalogue. So that's important.
Mentioning To Build a Home, this song has more than 500 million streams on Spotify, which is quite a lot for a non-mainstream song like this. How do you explain?
Well, it became a bit of a phenomena on its own, but I think through word of mouth and actually through socials, it's kind of had its renaissance. I think TikTok made it at points gone viral. But when I originally, as I said earlier, when I kind of like delivered it to Ninja Tune, they didn't really know, they couldn't quite they couldn't join the dots, they couldn't connect the leap that I'd made from Everyday, which is very much of a beats and club influenced London, kind of like soul and hip hop with Fontella and Roots Maneuver, and with a bit of orchestral, John Barry samples, blah, 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 to a very kind of like heartfelt, kind of minimal song. And for me, it was about writing a piece of music that was, the lyrical content had to be really, really kind of like, really key. So that, you know, even, I think that's one of the things in contemporary music is like the songwriting, the lyrical content is trash. It's absolute trash. But then that tells us a lot about society.
Yeah.
And how transient society is, and it's all, social media inflates egotism, which I'm kind of really not interested in, and people spend far too much time on their own kind of inflated personas and personalities that they try to create, which social media allows people to go unchecked. So To Build a Home was a very kind of political statement, and I think originally the label didn't really know what to do with it. It wasn't, you know, considered as viable for a radio kind of single, because it's too slow, and just didn't fit in any boxes. But
Yeah.
then where it did start to get traction was through TV shows in America. Mm-hmm. Grey's Anatomy, and a bunch of others, and then some films and advertising, like good creative advertising, and that was the way it found itself into kind of a global kind of like consciousness, and not through the regular music mainstream kind of like outlets, which is kind of sad. But then I think at that time, TV shows became a little bit more viable and more interesting than films, and based on kind of like American TV shows, and people started the spotlight changed to kind of TV series, and then To Build a Home was used in quite a lot of closing scenes, and it as I said, it created traction that way. Yeah. And then social media started kind of becoming a big kind of like player in communication, and it just continued, and then TikTok arrives and somebody puts a post up, and then it goes viral, and then a piece of music that they'd never heard of before, or an artist they'd never heard of before, then gets picked up. Then they got to Spotify to hear a cleaner version, and it's just created its own momentum without any marketing, and but I think it's respect to the piece of music.
Live at the Royal Albert Hall was a remarkable live album. What challenges did you face during capturing that recorded live performance?
It was a show that it was my manager, Dom, who's like, he's going, I think the album my Fleur was released, and then it's like, the end of the year we're going to do the Royal Albert Hall, which, if you're British and London, it's like one of the kind of like prestigious venues. Yep. And I never thought it would happen, but then it did, and it was just like, it was I was expecting it to be a very overwhelming and scary experience, but because it's in the round, because basically the choir seats at the back, they can sell if you're not working with a choir. I mean, we didn't really have a big orchestra, and so you were fully 360 in the round, and it's a very, very amazing experience and sensation. I think it's very aggressive, like a 2D stage where the audience is just kind of like in a line, you're in a line. It's quite aggressive. So when you're in the round, it's soft, and the energy is kind of like all around you rather than just coming at your chest. Mm-hmm. And it was an amazing experience, an amazing kind of like show, and just one venue, one of the great venues around the world to say played there, as well as the Sydney Opera House and the Walt Disney Concert Hall. Mm-hmm. And it's just continuing to kind of like be able to perform at these places is delightful. I feel very honoured.
Your 2019 album, To Believe, marked a return after 12 years. How did the band evolve during that hiatus?
There was not really. I suppose there was a studio album hiatus.
Okay.
I produced an album in New York in 2000. So my flow was 2007. It's probably around 2009, and I shelved it just because it didn't feel right. Mm-hmm. But it was really great songwriting. I suppose what happened, it was just not to kind of go into it in too much detail. It became too many voices in the music, whereas it's always generally been from the beginning a sample-based way of constructing tracks, instrumental or vocal. But when you put a band into, I was kind of co-writing with a guitarist, but doing live studio versions, there's a lot more personalities in the room. Mm-hmm. Because all the instrumentation was live. It felt that it wasn't as transparent as I wanted it to be. Too much conflict in personalities, therefore it's like, what is this meant to be? So I kind of just like put it aside.
So was it erased, or will it be released?
It's not. I don't think you could erase things anymore, can you? I've got it archived, mm-hmm. and at some point I'm going to revisit it and kind of maybe the songwriting. As I said, the songwriting is great, but I think working with a 5-piece band, mainly the rhythm section, was not the right move at the time. So I shelved it, but we were still doing lots of live shows. I did In Motion release, I did the Crimson Wing score for Disney.
Sure.
But in terms of the cinematic, it's kind of like, I was doing a bit of production as well for some other people. And so the New York album would have been the album as cinematic, but because it was shelved, that time passes, and kids and moving from New York to LA, and then LA to Paris, and then Paris to the UK, and then UK to Lisbon in Portugal. So a lot of shit going on.
Yeah.
Basically.
Technology has evolved significantly since your early works.
Yes.
How it influenced your approach to recording music?
So, very much not influenced kind of ideas, but ways to kind of put those ideas together. I think the technology is insane. I was kind of like laughed at when I lived in New York and went and queued at the mm-hmm. Apple Store when the first iPhone was released. Oh. On day one, I was there because I'm very much into technology, and it has how rapid technology has developed in the last 15, 20 years is insane. And it's sometimes a little bit difficult to keep up with it all. But, they are essentially just tools. There are more tools to kind of like be able to experiment. And it's still about putting out good ideas. It doesn't really matter how you get to it, but I think technology has got more user-friendly, and that's a really important thing. We need good graphic user interfaces to be able to explore, and I think to have it more immediate, kind of like hands-on kind of approaches of being able to explore an idea quickly. I think technology has very much helped on that. It's not about getting lost in kind of arpeggiators or in the depths of kind of VIs and thousands of patches.
Yeah.
It's more about it's always about the idea. It's like, don't lose sight of the good idea. And all these tools are there just to support. And fun, they're a lot of fun to play with. I think Teenage Engineering is a great kind of like company. Yeah. It's very playful. I've got a bunch of small synths and pedals which are made, they're all boutique companies from around the world, a lot coming out of the States. And a lot of it are, in some cases, are designed for kids. Yeah. Kids like little recording devices and little kind of xylophones or little kind of like synthesizers. And, you know, a little recording device has got a pitch control and a tempo. And kids love it because it's intuitive and it's like immediate. But it's actually the very great toys for musicians and producers to play with, because they're so they're inviting. They're not scary. You don't have to go through page after page after page in kind of digital format to get. And by that point, you're just like, the idea is either passed or you're a bit bored of the device. So it's fun times for sure.
In recent years, it also has been new interest in vinyl records and analog recordings. Do you have preference for digital or analog recordings?
I think it's interesting. I think they have very different characteristics, and I think obviously a really kind of great thing to do is just the combination is really interesting. And it's always been like that for me, actually, like, you know, sampling records and then putting it into a digital system and then back out through tape. And like the new record I'm working on, there's a lot of it in the box, so it's digital, but I'm actually starting to replace digital with analog, which adds more kind of air, more kind of just artifact and noise and just kind of a bit of kind of like distortion and color. And then I might actually for this record mix it to tape.
Really?
Again, yeah, just because it's, you know, again with the you know how fast technology has kind of developed, and all of the platforms for music, to access music and to listen to it is all very low quality. And like for kids growing up, they don't have any comparison of like a really, you know, beautiful hi-fi system with playing, you know, a nice kind of vinyl like in full stereo high fidelity to like a super low kind of like compressed kind of like MP3, and so they've got no reference point. But I think it's good kind of to continue. Otherwise, it's like all of the great studios around the world. It's like they do all of this kind of like creative kind of like sculpting of sound, and then it gets reduced down to, it's kind of like, it's sad. It gets reduced down to like a compressed MP3 where most of the information is taken out. And it's algorithms, it's not a creative choice, it's kind of like a mathematic to kind of like, let's remove parts of these frequencies but leave a little bit so the information translates and more and more and more. So you're just sucking all of the kind of like the soul out of the music. So I think analog has got to kind of stay. But it's, you know, it's like humans and AI, you know, yep. Analog and digital, there you go. It's like where do we go with that? And I think it's kind of being respectful of how to utilize, not as a kind of like a tool of war, you know.
And talking about the tape plug-in emulations don't work for you? They don't do the job, you think?
Not really. They are emulations, there you go.
Yeah.
It's like, why not? Again, if you can't get access or you can't afford real tape, then an emulation kind of gets you kind of in the ballpark, but I feel the difference when it's the real thing. It's like you listen to a live recording of a band, like the Royal Albert Hall live version. It's like, but were you at the show? No. Well, then the difference is profound, you know. So.
Man with a Movie Camera was another notable project where you record music for a silent movie by the Gavertov. How was it like to work on it?
It was brilliant, actually. It was so much fun. That was a commission for a film festival in Porto, where we performed in May 2000 for Porto being the City of European Culture in 2001. It's an incredible film, and it still is. I was reviewing it just last week. Very, very ahead of its time. Very avant-garde, very kind of political, and just super creative. And it was a challenge to write a score for that. But I kind of watched it a number of times when I accepted the commission, but then did a lot of research on Vertov and read some of his diaries and his notes on how he heard the soundtrack, which would be very rhythmic. Was one of his kind of notes in his diary. And so, which I understood, and the track Work It, Man with a Movie Camera, is, you know, the mechanism of industry, the mechanism of work, human interaction, repetition. It was a gateway into kind of trying to write a score which would be sympathetic to his notes. And it was a lot of fun. We spent 4 days in a rehearsal studio with a TV VHS player. The only version I could find was a VHS at the British Film Institute in London. And that was their edit. The more I discovered that because it was on 35mm film stock, every different country that had the rights to it, it was a slightly different edit. And it was for a one-off performance in Porto. And it was in the Coliseo de Porto, 3,500 seated theatre and we were in the orchestra pit and projected the film. The focus was for people to watch the film, and we were almost kind of invisible, just a 5-piece, and it was an amazing response, and an hour that passed like 2 minutes. It was just, we were so immersed in, we all had TV monitors, small TV monitors to watch the film as we were performing. We had cue points, and it was quite an intensive hours worth of concentration, and it was all about and there's no backing tracks. It was all live, so we had to be really precise about entry points, like cue points and tempos, ins and outs, changes, based all to a picture. So it was a challenge, but then it was so well received that we then toured it around the world. Yeah. And then the last show we did was in Moscow, and it was quite a sweet moment where an old guy came to the show. I think he got in touch with the promoter. So I only met him after the show, and he was a friend of Vertov's wife, who was still alive in the countryside outside Moscow. And he watched the show, and he came backstage, and he was talking to me, and he's going, Vertov would have been very, very proud of this soundtrack. And then he was leaving after the show to go back to the small village and then to see Vertov's wife and tell her about the experience.
That's sweet.
Because she was the editor.
Yeah.
It was Vertov, and the brother was a filmmaker, and his wife the editor. And I was like, it was very touching. And now it's 20 years on. Damn, 20 years gone. And we are going to be touring it again. But not the film. We're going to be playing the audio score. And we are now working with who's playing tonight as well with us, a visual artist. Super creative, and we're going to be resampling the film in sections. There's going to be a lot of equipment getting moved now.
Yeah.
So we're going to be sampling the film, but it's about playing the audio score.
So last question. Last album was 2019, 4 years, almost 5. So is the new album, new record on the way?
It's next year. It's coming out
Next year?
Yeah, it's well on the way.
Will it be different in some way from the last one?
Yeah.
Really?
There'll be connections. I'm definitely going more for an open, kind of like a more rejoiced, positive sound, a little bit more up-tempo, but then some kind of more ambient, more ballad tracks with vocalists. I'm exploring lots of undiscovered vocalists, actually. That's rather than kind of like going cherry-picking, kind of like big names. It's more digging for new talent, which I think is a really nice thing to do, because it gives people, because the world is so saturated with music, everyone's struggling to kind of pop, and it's like, I don't wish being in that place for anybody at the moment, because it's just, there's so much out there, and it's difficult to be heard and to cut through and to make a career. So but there's a lot of talent out there. That's the thing. So I'm digging into, and you know, through social media is a great way to kind of like, for people to actually have a little, you know, almost like a CV.
Yeah.
You get to hear what's going on, and so some of the people I'm working with are just from all around the world. There's, you know, but they're all pretty much unheard of. But they sound amazing. So next year.
So good luck with that, and thank you very much for the interview.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Bye.
Thanks.
Jestli se vám pořad On Air líbí, dejte like a odebírejte YouTube kanál Kytary.cz.